afternoon guys, welcome back to Maverick Baking and welcome back to another recipe video. Today I'm going to be showing you how to jazz up the classic Victoria sandwich cake. Let's do it. Okay folks, the first step we need to take in making our Victoria sponge is of course the fat. Now, grim as that is to start anything, the fat most used in a Victoria sponge is butter. But butter is not necessarily essential. Butter is, of course, an expensive option, especially just now when many of us are a little bit strapped for cash with everything that happens to be going on in the world. So if you don't want to kind of spend extra on butter, especially an amount this much, do feel free to use margarine. Something I've actually found is that margarine can give the cake an even lighter texture. Some people aren't keen on margarine because of the taste, because of the fact it can sometimes contain palm oil, but it is a more affordable option. It tends to come in larger containers, so use whichever you prefer to use. If you are using butter, make sure it is softened. This one is bordering on melting because I forget about things very easily when I'm trying to warm them up slightly, but let's not talk about that. So you want your butter to be soft, not melted, not really hard, because the harder your butter is, the harder you're gonna have to work these things we call muscles, supposedly. So to your fat, you're going to add your sweetener. The sweetener in question today is of course classic castor sugar. Castor sugar is widely available across Britain. It is essentially just a bit finer than granulated sugar. In the US, in Canada, I believe you call this superfine sugar. You can use granulated sugar in this recipe. The reason we like to use castor is because it does dissolve a little bit quicker. It is also a nice affordable option. Traditional Victoria sponge recipes use an equal quantity of sugar to butter, both for scientific purposes of getting a good rise in color on the cake and also for taste. Personally, I actually sometimes find that's too much, and especially with the modern world's growing distaste towards sugar, I found you can actually reduce the sugar by almost a quarter and not affect the taste rise or colour of the cake too much. Now that's not necessarily a health choice, it's not even necessarily a money saving choice, it's completely up to you, but that is typically how I've been baking my cakes. There is no need to pour this in any specific way, you can just tip it in willy-nilly and hope that you're not as heavy-handed as I am. Okay, we have our sugar added to our butter. Now at this stage, you can add some vanilla extract. Now this is something that obviously wasn't in the most classic of Victoria sponge recipes, but it's something that is very common and popular to do so nowadays. Now I would say if you're using butter, you don't need to add vanilla because butter tends to add a nice kind of rich enough, decadent enough flavor by itself, along with the sugar and just the nice gentle browning it gets in the oven. Because this is a fairly simple cake at the end of the day, you know, it's not a wedding cake, it's not some fancy, incredible, Pinterest-worthy cake, it's just a Victoria sandwich cake. If you're using margarine, which does have more of an artificial flavor or a less kind of rich and full flavor like butter does, I would probably recommend using vanilla. As I'm using butter, I'm going to avoid vanilla today. If you're making a regular Victoria sponge, you would simply start mixing this up as it is. I am going to do a little kind of twist on my Victoria sponge today. This is obviously something you do not have to do, but it's something I fancied because I have the ingredients to hand and we never follow the rules here, you know? Got to stay on brand when you remember to. So at this stage, and this is something you can do to Victoria sponges with almost anything, I am going to add a little bit of lemon zest. This just includes the use of a lemon and a very fine grater. We're going to grate the skin in, it's going to give it a lovely smell and just a little kind of hint of summery lemon flavor, which we love. But at this stage, if you don't like lemon, you can use orange, you can use grapefruit, you can use pretty much any kind of flavouring that won't differ the texture of the cake too much. You know, if you like, you could add almond flavouring to give a bit of a kind of marzipan feel to the cake. You can add booze, if you want. You can really add whatever you want to a Victoria sponge, and that's one of the things that makes it such a popular kind of cake to make. It's totally versatile, it's totally customizable, and it's very forgiving. It's time to mix. Now, this is the part where it would be really handy if you do have an electric mixer of any kind, But obviously not all of us have that to hand, not all of us can afford it, so a good old wooden spoon or even a kind of big metal tablespoon will do the job. And essentially what you want to do to begin with is just kind of slowly work that butter or the margarine into the sugar. This just makes sure it turns into a kind of paste. But you can see it's still a little bit sandy. You can even hear some of those sugar granules that are still to be dissolved. Now, if we were to stop mixing it here, it would technically make a cake, but it would make quite a heavy cake, and it's still very kind of yellow, which suggests we haven't beaten much air into it. If you decide to stand and beat it for even a minute or two, it will not only help soften the butter even further, meaning that you won't get any nasty lumps, it will also help dissolve that sugar, which means you'll get a more even bake, and it will start to get paler and start to be lighter, and a lighter cake is always the result you want. So it has now been 1 minute, and you can see the mixture is significantly paler. It's taking up a lot more room. It's a lot lighter when it falls off the spoon, and it's just generally a bit fluffier. That is exactly the result we want. I really hope the light isn't blinding you all just now. So this is the kind of texture we want to get to, and now we're going to add our eggs. So for a cake of this size, I am just going to be adding 3 eggs. And when you are adding eggs to any kind of cake mixture, it usually helps to add them one by one. If you add too much liquid to this at once, it will kind of split and curdle, which you can salvage, but it's not the best way to start. So if you add the eggs one by one, it just gives everything a chance to kind of get to know each other, ease their way into their evening, and let them have a good time. So let's do that. Okay, so we now have our 3 eggs incorporated in there, and you can see now that it's much more of a kind of liquid mixture than pure fluff, which is exactly what we want just before we add the flour. I'm getting out of breath. It's quite embarrassing. Let's get our flour in. For this recipe, I always like to use good old faithful self-raising flour. Now I realize not every country has this available. If you only have cake flour, plain flour, all-purpose flour, I would recommend adding a little bit of raising agent. If you have baking powder, probably about a teaspoon, and I would maybe say a half a teaspoon to a full teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda or baking soda as well. But I am going to be using this. Of course, the full recipe will be in the description box below, and it will be written out much more clearly than the thoughts that are vomiting out of my mouth just now. So let's get our flour in. So at this stage, now that we have our flour in, if you used unsalted butter or margarine that didn't contain a lot of salt, it's a good idea to add just a little pinch, because sweet foods need to be seasoned just as much as savory foods do. I used unsalted butter just because it's what I had in the fridge, so I have added just a little pinch of regular table salt, nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just the kind of thing that will help round out all of those lovely simple flavors in there. And we're just going to gently, and I mean gently, whisk that flour in. In the time it's taken me to say that is all the mixing we need to do. So you can see now we have this lovely, light, fluffy, aerated cake mixture. Nice and pale, everything all nice and incorporated, nothing fancy, nothing strenuous, even though I am sweating. What we need to do now is just get this into our tins and bake it. So I am going to be using some simple 6-inch cake tins for this recipe. You can also bake this exact amount in 7-inch cake tins. They will just be slightly shorter. And of course, you can double the mixture if you want to make a 9-inch cake, and you can triple it if you want to make a 12-inch huge cake. That's on you, honey. You make it whichever size you like. Once you have your greaseproof paper in there, we're just going to scoop your cake mix into it. For doing this, I would always recommend using a spatula just so that you don't miss any of that cake mix, or if you do want to potentially miss some cake mix so you have a good excuse to lick the bowl, I won't tell anyone. So we are just going to scoop roughly half of our cake mixture into each tin. If you're the kind of person who likes to measure these things, feel free to measure it. I am not one of those people, so I'm not going to. Once the cake mix is in your tin, just gently kind of level it out. You don't want to press out too much of that air, and you don't want to kind of flatten it down too much, but you just want to make it into a nice even circle so that it's not going to rise too much on one side or just cause any issues that you don't need in your life. Okay, we have filled our cake tins. What we're going to do now is put them into our oven, which has been preheating for probably about half an hour or however long I have been waffling away to you lovely people. We're preheating it to about 180 degrees Celsius. That's about 160 if you're using a fan oven. I think it's about 350 Fahrenheit and roughly gas mark 4. It'll all be figured out properly in the description below. So let's get these in for 20 to 30 minutes or until they are risen, golden, and firm to the touch. See you soon. Okay guys, the cake is now complete. We have baked, cooled, sandwiched and sliced the cake, and I could not be more happy with the outcome. Just look at those colors. So fresh, so simple, but so kind of summery. So in the classic Victoria sandwich, once your cakes are cooled, you would sandwich them together with some strawberry or raspberry jam. Some people like to opt for double cream. Some people like to even use buttercream. I'm not one of those people. I like to keep it fairly kind of classic and simple, as I think it's one of these cakes that shouldn't be too heavy, too rich. It's just the perfect little pick-upable tea time treat. Plus, if you want to be serving this on a hot kind of sunny day like today, double cream isn't exactly the best thing to leave sitting out in the sun for hours. Much like I said in the flavouring of the cake, you can use pretty much anything to sandwich this cake. If you wanted, you could throw some Nutella in there, some Biscoff, you could throw some fruity kind of lemon curd. I have actually opted for a lemon and orange marmalade just to kind of go with the lemon zest that I put through the actual cake, and it's one that I'm really excited about. I think it just adds a new kind of freshness to the colours, which all kind of tie in together, and it's just a kind of tiny tweak on such a classic cake. As you can see, there isn't kind of a whole load of filling in there. We don't want it to be super sweet or either super bitter or really sour from all of that fruit either. We just want everything to be very kind of chill together. On top, I just dusted a little bit of icing sugar. You can also use caster sugar, you can leave it plain, you could even brush over a little bit of some kind of syrup or honey. It's so customizable, it's so versatile, and it just works. But what does this cake taste like? Shall we take a big old bite and find out? I'll get a fork to pretend that I'm civilized. So we have it all here. You can see just how much that gorgeous fluffy cake is just breaking apart. I am so excited to eat this. Let's see how it tastes. So light, so fluffy, and it goes so well with that kind of zingy marmalade in the middle. You can taste the butter, you can taste that lovely little bit of lemon zest we had through there. It's nothing too sweet, nothing too cloying, nothing too stodgy. It's just a perfect little kind of summertime bake for when you can be bothered to turn the oven on. If you would like to make your very own version of this Victoria sandwich cake or this kind of jazzed up version, the full recipe can be found in the description box below. It may also make its way onto my blog, maverickbaking.com, which will also be linked below. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for watching. I'm gonna go enjoy this cake in some peace and quiet, and I will see you for the next one.